We are recording now. All right, so this is the first session in the U.S. I do recommend everyone check out JB's notes and the EMEA Club. They have some decent insights into some of the things we're even going to talk about. We're going to talk about Chapter 1 of the Hacker Playbook, number 3. So I guess we'll start by saying like Chapter 1 is about setup and tools. Did anybody have anything interesting they discovered or any questions they had about what they read that they wanted to sort of chat with the group or anything? What do you guys want to talk about first?
Kind of a caution to throw out there if anybody hasn't gone through the first chapter. I was kind of just trying to follow along with the various examples. I don't know if labs is the right term. They're just kind of syntax to run through. But some of what's presented in the book is a little redundant because in one of the sections he recommends to use PTF and just install all the things. But then he does show you how to manually install individual pieces of that, which if you did the first step with PTF, you don't then have to go and install PowerShell, and you don't have to install some of the other tools because they're already there.
Good. So that was one thing with PowerShell specifically. So using the pen testers framework, the PTF, that gets you PowerShell as well.
Yeah, it did set it up. It's a little inconsistent in where it puts some of the tools. So if you follow the book's instructions, it has you download PTF itself into opt. But when you run PTF and you do the install scripts, it throws the majority of things into /pentest because it's using the old backtrack path format.
Yeah, right.
But PowerShell ended up getting installed in opt, and a couple of other tools also got installed in opt. And one other observation is if you use all of, I think there were like 3 or 4 install scripts that he recommended in the book. Just run these, and it puts a ton of stuff in there. At least one of them sets up some services that run automatically. So just something to be aware of. Like, I don't think there's necessarily any risk with them being active, but one of them listens on port 80. And so I found a conflict when I was just testing with Empire because I was trying to do an HTTP listener, and there was already something using that port because of what PTF had done.
Yeah, I had the same problem.
That was really good too, right? I used the pen testers framework, and I found I was trying to set something up in Azure, and I was just sort of troubleshooting some of the network things. And very well said. So we have here in chat, right? Next that TUPad. Nice. So this is I'm logged in SSH into it, and since I'm running on Azure, I put a firewall in front of it, and I mucked around with Azure a whole lot. But yes, you can't see me pointing at my screen, but you don't know what I'm pointing at. But you can see some of the opening and listening services, right? There's already a DNS server running, right? So if you go around messing around with DNS cat server later, and you go to set that up, you may find that there's conflicts on 53, and then just like you said, like if you browse to the 157, if you browse to port 80, not there, you'll find at least it's not there, it's not showing up, but there's an Apache server running on port 80. So I went ahead and just for the heck of it, I edited the index.html, so I knew it would be there. But right, that's the kind of stuff that, if you're using the PTF framework, you'll notice that. So you just got to look around and sort of learn the system. That's a pretty good caution, right? When it comes to the tools, he tells you a lot of different ways to get all the different tools, but kind of fails to tell you that you don't need to go through all the ways. So far, I don't know anything about like the vulnerable systems or the targets of this work. Has anybody looked ahead and sort of learned a little bit about the quote unquote the lab piece or what we'll be targeting and how that's going to work? Are they VMs you download, or anybody looked ahead at any of that?
At least some of them are VMs. Like there's I don't remember what it's called, but they're on that Cyber Kittens vein. There's at least one or two of them.
Okay, cool.
And to your point before, that's what I was just kind of curious about, that image that was in the book referenced in, the end of chapter 1 was kind of what we're talking about. There's a lot of overlap as far as him telling you to download all these different tools, and they might be, located, the same tool might be redundant in several different places, but I'm just wondering if his image is already refined and already includes all those tools, can we just mount that instead? That's what I was just trying to figure out.
So my interpretation of the first chapter was all those tools that he mentioned was you're setting up your C2 server. So you don't necessarily need all those tools installed.
Right.
Whereas that image he gives at the end is kind of your attacking machine, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the impression I got.
Okay. So it's not the one that we would technically mount in Azure or in AWS or anything like that.
That's the approach I took to it.
Gotcha.
Whatever I have in the cloud is ephemeral. It's going to go away. It can go away at a moment's notice, and I won't be missing anything.
I see. Okay. Gotcha. Did anybody buy domains for this exclusively for this test or no?
I did.
Yeah, I grabbed one.
Any recommended sites?
I got mine off of Namecheap. It ended up being like $1.17.
Oh, geez. I'll check that out then.
Can you just throw that in the chat so people can see what you're talking about? That's what I wanted. I actually was, we're going to get there. I wanted to sort of walk through some of the intros a little bit and just talk about red teaming. When we're done talking about some of the tools, this chapter talks a lot about tools, and I didn't want to actually talk about and jump back to some of those sections on red teaming, MITRE ATT&CK framework and stuff. But I think if you take a Kali Linux VM and you can export an image, or if you build an Ubuntu server, like to talk to the question out there in chat there, use the pen testers framework on an Ubuntu image and do that locally, and then take that image and use the image to create an AWS or Azure VM. Those are all reasonable strategies. And what I did a Kali Linux VM, where then I used the pen testers framework on it and realized, oh, that's going to screw everything up, and that's a bad way to do it. I blew away that snapshot, and then I went back to the original Kali Linux VM and individually picked a couple extra tools that I didn't already have on there, and I put them on there. Then I downloaded his VM, and I looked through it, and it has all the tools I think you'll need to be an attack machine. And then in between in the chapter, I think you could build a command and control server using the different techniques he gives you going into the end of the chapter. But I also went out to Azure, and I used the pen testers framework to build a VM. I started with an Ubuntu image and built it out here too, just to sort of learn the cloud piece of it. That's one thing I actually wanted. I was hoping someone else would be willing to say maybe share their screen and just sort of show us, because I've never done that. Like, I've never gone out to a name server, a GoDaddy, bought a domain, and created or followed the instructions like they have here. I didn't do it yet for this chapter, and I don't think I've ever done it. So I don't know if anybody's willing to show some of that. That could be handy too when it comes to tools and command and control. Does anybody feel comfortable sort of taking over the screen and just sort of browsing out to their brand new domain, or at least look at how it was set up and how some of those changes were done? Anybody want to do that? Volunteers? Me?
I might be able to show some of that on what I did. The one issue that I've run into with, I was labbing up the DNS cat stuff, is when I test it through proper DNS, the communication gets through and then DNS cat crashes on the server. And I haven't figured out why, but it hits some kind of an exception. If I go straight to it, like specify I want to connect to this DNS server, then it works fine and I get my session and everything works. but when it passes through and I'm actually proxying through real DNS, it dies like every time, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I had the same experience, but on the client side, the client loses connection right away, unless I specify the name server, the particular name.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like some kind of countermeasure in DNS infrastructure that's recent, because I've used tools like that not long ago and had no issues, so I'd be surprised, but maybe there's something new going on.
Are you using the most recent version, like Bionic Beaver of Ubuntu, or what are you using? Because I know the networking changed a lot in the most recent Ubuntu. It's called NetPlan now. And I had tons of DNS problems trying to get NetPlan to talk to LDAP and all this kind of stuff just a couple of weeks ago.
No, I don't have anything cutting edge. My C2 server that I'm hosting is, I think it's 1604, and my victim machine that I'm testing on is just like a Debian distro that's probably a year old.
Well, that idea's out.
But I can.
And does anybody? I mean,
let me log into my account. I need to see what's visible on the dashboard, but I can show kind of the setup steps that I did, even though the payload's not necessarily working.
that would be great. I think one thing this chapter, like I'm hearing it, right? It's not written into the chapter, but I think, let's suppose you're opening this up and you haven't done a whole lot with pen testing or red teaming at first, and I think it's just going to drive home the point that you have to be a master of your tools. But you have to have a little bit of Linux admin in you, a little bit of network admin, and if you don't, you have to do the trial and error, put the hands on the keyboard, have the error message, have the error message, have the error message. Even my attempts at get, right, and just sort of fumbling around in the dark with that. And you just have to be persistent with it until you get it and you understand what's going on. Like, does anybody else get that out of his writing here in this chapter, that you have to be a master of your tools, and you are going to end up spending a lot of time making them work for you. The more you can get that done up front, the better you are. Anybody else read into it that way?
I did. I kind of had a bunch of issues with stuff, so I set mine up with 1804, and when I tried starting up Empire, it just did not like that in the least bit. It wouldn't work, and it turns out I had to revert the one of the versions of Python that I had because I just didn't like the newest version.
I really started reading it, and it seemed to me like this is actually meant almost as a sequel and not as the starter book on it all. Because he even says flat out that there are certain things he's not going to go over because he went over them in early books. And sorry I'm late, everybody.
No, I concur.
Hey, Shaggy. Hey, let's do that too, and then we'll go forward. Let's go back to the beginning. Right, we jumped in talking about tools. I wrote a couple notes in as I was going through the introduction, and Shecky kind of got us into it already. And then at the end, too, we'll go back and we'll take a look at the command and control server setup with the domain names. Anybody, what did you guys think about the introduction where he talks about red teaming and the difference between that and penetration testing? Do you guys agree with the way he characterizes that? Have you always thought of it that way, or was it something new? To me, it was kind of nice to see it laid out the way he did it, but what do you guys think?
If you've ever listened to the Red Team podcast, those guys really get into that specificity, and they're kind of like talking about it from the perspective of like 3-letter agencies and, you know, international kind of work that they're doing as contractors. And yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I just started listening to that. They're pretty good.
It's so good. But I mean, they really talk a lot about the encapsulation of penetration testing in relation to overall red teaming. and they introduce you to kind of some folks that are really focused on kind of the bigger scope, which it's a super interesting concept because they're doing stuff that's like so out of the field in comparison to what penetration testing, and it's the whole world all wrapped into it. I'd give it a listen. It's really entertaining. They're really cool guys too.
Anyone else?
To have that one table he's got in there with the different goals listed. It gives you an idea kind of how to explain that to customers, for example. So that's on page, I guess page 8 of the introduction. When you're talking to customers too and trying to scope out a project, that's a good way to kind of look what did they want you to do, what would they benefit from, and then at that point you can tell them, okay, well, we're going to do a red team test rather than a penetration test.
Yeah, well said. I guess that's really what it comes down to. Like, you can listen to the Red Team podcast, which I'm going to check it out now, but if you're that close to it, you might be looking at trees and not seeing the forest, right? Like arguing VI versus Emacs type situation. But if you step back and you say, okay, like why do I care to know the difference? It would be because I'm talking to someone who maybe knows IT or not, and they have no idea what they're asking me for, and they think they want pen testing, and they really need red teaming, or they're asking for red teaming, and they really want a vulnerability scan, or neither, right? And so being able to characterize it, I thought was a really nice, useful piece to the introduction. That table was like, yeah, that was right on. I think one thing I'm going to take away is the distinction that red team activities test security, like the security team, and penetration tests test IT and the IT controls. So therefore, a red team activity will be about evasion, or it'll at least include evasion, lateral movement, right? I think the way he described it is you don't just stop at domain admin, right? Stuff like that. So, I think he even talks a little bit about metrics too, but I thought that was pretty good. That's definitely something I'm going to take away. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts? Anybody else have an experience related to that topic, red team versus pen testing, in their own work or their own life?
Previously, I also had the impression like red teaming is just extending the pen test. So pen test is all about exploiting vulnerabilities, and that's all. That's where you stop in pen test. So you tell them, hey, your network can be broken in this 3, 4, 5, 6 ways. But red teaming is taking that a step ahead and go complete the kill chain. So what happens after you can break into the network? So and make it until the point of exfiltration. So can you reach the crown jewels in that network? Can you successfully exfil that crown jewels? And how long can you stay and persist in that network in a stealthy mode? Blah, blah, blah. But reading some other articles, which I also shared in the chat group, I got the impression that red teaming is not just extending the pen test. So it's not just completing the kill chain, starting from recon and reaching the exfiltration point. But red team is also evaluating blue team detection controls and response controls. So if you don't have a matrix, if you don't have something blue to compare with, you're not doing red teaming. So red teaming is not just breaking into a network and stealing the crown jewels. No. You have to compare with the blue teams on every step of your operation. So when you are doing recon and you are doing a direct recon, what we also call active recon, you'll ask the blue team, hey, did you notice if that active recon, did you notice those unusual pokes on your web server and your network parameter? And once you break into the network, you will ask the blue team, hey, did you notice something? And same on every step of that process. So And that's why he also mentioned the term time to detect and the time to mitigate, TTD and TTM, as a KPI, a key performance indicator that you can use against every technique discussed in this book. So I think for me, the takeaway would be to not just go through the red team techniques, but also spend some brain cycles in evaluating what would be the time to detect for this technique in my environment. And also, like he mentioned, the ATT and CK metrics from MITRE. So every red team technique that we go through in this book, we have to fit that into that metrics. All right, so this tool we just discussed, where does it fall in that metrics? And then if we are going to detect this activity in our environment, what would be our time to detect and what would be our time to mitigate against this? So yeah, this is the kind of picture that I'm building in my mind of being a red team activity, something that you can't do without engaging the blue side.
I think that was a really, really good point. One thing that I think you'll find in that podcast is something that they continuously come back to is what red teaming truly is accurately as possible replicating the adversary. And the scope of replicating an adversary is much larger than the scope of performing a mechanical test. As creative as penetration testing can be, it's still a mechanical process. And it takes artistry and all kinds of experience because there's so many different facets of it, but it's still an encapsulated portion of that scope.
Hey, if I could just tag on to that. So I feel like a lot of times when people say the adversary, and by the way, I agree with you 100%, dude, you hit the nail on the head. But when you're hearing that for the first time, I think people that are new to that term think to themselves from a pen testing standpoint, well, aren't I the adversary? Aren't I considered the bad guy? Aren't I emulating the bad guy? And I would take it one step further to say your organization, the adversary are usually those specific adversaries to your organization, to your industry, the most likely people that are targeting you. Just dig a little bit deeper sometimes, because I see when people gloss over when I say the adversary, it's like just blanket term for bad guy, and really there's more to it than that.
All right, so from personal experience, actually very recent experience, and looking at what the definitions as he put them are and what you guys have been saying about what pen testing is versus red teaming. Pen testing can be completely separate from red teaming. I'll tell you that. It doesn't have to be a straightforward thing. I will give you a great example. My work, we just recently had and if you're watching the video, you'll see the air quotes, yearly pen test earlier just in September. I'm going through everything. This pen test consisted of them going ahead and giving my boss a file to run on our systems, on a couple of our systems, so that way they actually were inside. There's no penetration in that. They were already inside. This was a red team test. It was to see how good our defenses were internally. Would we see them? Would we be able to stop them? Now, I actually caught one thing that they were doing. But having gone through all of this, it was a completely separate thing from what your standard pen test was. When they were inside, did they do things such as internal vuln scans to find stuff? Yes. Did they move laterally from system to system? Yes, they did. Do I have their pen test report that I'm going through and finding ways of not just mitigating the vulnerabilities that they pointed out, but also going ahead and taking things like our SIM and figuring out ways of finding that stuff through the logs. All right, so they used Mimikatz with DC Sync to go ahead and gain control of the DCs and gain domain access. Now what am I doing? That was the part of it that I think the book didn't really stress enough on at all. It's not just a pen test. This is way beyond that, and nor does it need to necessarily be the recon or anything along those times to do red teaming. Can that be part of red teaming? Yes. but it doesn't have to be part of it. Red team is really a much broader base for what you have to find than just somebody hammering away at a server or a firewall until they break through it.
I like, and I think we can all agree that good tests have to some degree an objective. I don't want to get into the idea that everything has to be scoped tightly, but objectives should be stated and discussed in advance. And the best tests are the ones that give us results we can use. And it seems like the tests that reproduce that are the ones where there's an objective. Like, so in your example where they're starting from the inside, okay, so that was the kind of test someone wanted because they know the controls they wanted to check. I think that's good to understand the distinction. But I think no matter what kind of test, I think that's going to be something that gets you a better result in the end, right? Knowing what the goals are in advance. So.
Yeah, that's critical. And pairing that to the sophistication of that client, right, is because there's for quite a while been some fair criticisms of organizations that sell a thing called a pen test, but it's really just a vuln scan. But on the other side of that, there are organizations that they don't need a pen test. Like, they're so junior in their implementation that all they need is a vuln scan because they don't even really know what that is, right? They'll get value out of that if you do it for them and teach them. And then you have your more, kind of middle ground clients where they need an actual pen test, right? They need to see, can someone get into the organization from the outside, whether it's through social engineering or exploitation or, whatever that method may be. And then in my mind, the way I see it is red teaming is for that next step up of client, right? They've had their pen test, they've done pen tests for a few years, they know what that's all about. They've fixed things a lot, they've tightened things up, and now they need to see, like, what is the real longer term type of engagement. They've got some monitoring in place, they've got some detection that's set up. Because if they don't have any of that set up, a red team is going to be completely wasted to the same degree that a traditional pen test would be wasted on that really junior client that they don't even know what vulnerabilities are, right? If you sell them a pen test, that's just as bad as selling a red team to kind of the middle maturity model client.
So this is our first meeting. We're talking about chapter 1. A lot of this is about tools and getting set up, red team versus pen test. I'm curious, as we get closer to the end, I'm going to put that question back out there again. So it sounds like right now we're thinking that the red pen testing is medium and red teaming is advanced. I'm wondering if this book's going to change my mind. I happen to agree with you. I'm wondering if this book's going to change my mind where it's not necessarily the red team is the advanced, it's just different with a different objective. So I don't know. I agree with you right now. But I'm curious to see maybe if this book will change my mind and make me think that red teaming can still be for intermediate. I think no matter what, the junior. You don't want to go around bayoneting the wounded, right? There's no benefit in paying for that kind of test. But I'm thinking maybe there could still be a benefit to doing red teaming against a medium organization, just because they just have different objectives and different goals. I don't know. I don't think so. I think in the end we'll all agree that this is the advanced piece. You've got you've spent the time and the effort to set up the ability to stop the attacker. You need more than a pen test. You need something like a red team. I think it's going to end up being advanced.
Well, the scope of the organization that plays heavily into that, right? Because you've got like oil and gas, energy, security startups. There's small companies that maybe aren't even super well funded. And at the same time, just as the nature of the business that they're performing, they need that level of security, before they even get to the point of having good practices that would be compliant with what we would all consider to be, secure. It's just a matter of what the business needs.
I think a pen test, though, encompasses so much, or a red team engagement can encompass so much more, because you can incorporate that pen test into it. That while you can say that, yeah, it's an advanced, it's not, we're pigeonholing it. It's not whether one is advanced or one is not advanced. It's what is one looking to actually test in the system? Are you looking to test your internal systems and see, can you detect if somebody breaches in, et cetera? Then you want a red team. Do you want to see, are your defenses good against getting hammered against? Then you want a pen test. It's not whether one's more advanced or one's not, because you could use advanced techniques in both instances. It's a matter of what your organization's actually looking for.
Yeah, I think that this book is definitely not explaining the entire red team philosophy, because it's not discussing a team at all. It's talking about one member of the team doing the technical stuff, when the scope is so wide for an actual red team engagement that it could be as broad as doing anything. You could try to get hired at the company, social engineering, physical security, whatever. This book seems entirely technical and sort of more focused on getting pen testers to the point where they'd be like a solid technical member on a red team, which is awesome. It's cool. I mean, I think that's what I'm reading it for, but it doesn't really say that anywhere.
So to expand on what CJ said, I think a lot of it has to do with the scope. I think with a pen test, you kind of have a narrow scope, get domain admin or get an admin's credentials, something like that. With red teaming, you might not necessarily get domain admin, but you might exfiltrate 20 gigabytes of customer data or something like that. It's just a much broader scope of what you're trying to do with the red team.
All right, I'm going to what we'll do now is we'll just sort of step through some of the chapters and sections a little bit. If you're here and you're listening, that's good. Just don't hesitate to sort of jump in and share some of your experiences, or maybe talk a little bit about why you're reading the book. That'd be great. That's what I'm going to do at the very end. Is I'm going to sort of just open it up, and I'm just curious to hear people's experiences and sort of why they're reading the book and what brings them here today, kind of thing. So keep that in mind and think about that in advance. The preface. I like this list here of new stuff. Abusing Active Directory. I put a little note next to that for myself. I'm interested in, are they going to get into OIDC or OAuth 2 protocols, sort of see if there are ways to abuse those kinds of access single sign-on tools. I thought that was good. The second page, III, 3 of the preface here, he says, so I would say relax, take a good read, and go through the lab examples. Build your own lab, push your scripts to a public GitHub repository. So, raise your hand if you read through that section or started this book, went out to GitHub, and if you didn't have one already, get an account. I'm putting my hand up. That's a lot of what I was doing out here in VSTS. By the way, under the hood, VSTS is GitHub anyway, or excuse me, is a Git repo and can interact with GitHub. So I'd recommend you do that, just because knowing GitHub and how it works might be useful, not to mention the things you create for yourself could be useful in the future. The notes and disclaimer. Read this section and take it to heart. Like, don't mess around. Don't mess around. Like, even if you're working and the people at work expect you to do this kind of work, don't necessarily assume you could do things without asking. So anybody else here ever have an experience where you needed to get out of jail free card? Anybody else? Speak up or say that again. What's up?
Never needed one, but within my work, we often get them just in case we do, because it is a good idea. And I can't stress enough, when I was taking my notes on this chapter, I put that in boldface. Read the CFAA. If you're new to this, if you're just learning, if it's not something you already do for work and you kind of already know what to be cautious of, read the CFAA, understand it. Read the Wikipedia page first because it's a summary, but then read the actual text because that is a federal law that it is very easy to be in violation of, even if your intentions are good, because that law does not address intent. It addresses actions. So don't ever do anything that you don't have permission to do, right? Labs are good when you set them up, or if you join something like Hack the Box or whatever. Obviously, testing clients is good because you have a contract with them. Never touch someone's system that you don't have authorization to.
Yep. Yeah. Read, plan in advance, cover that part off. Just because we're learning these things, yeah, just be extra careful. And this section of the book handles that really well, not to mention the link that just went in the chat. Check that out too. When you're actually doing engagements, you have a contract. If something coincidentally goes wrong while you're doing a pen test or a red team activity, you're going to be under the microscope and people are going to blame you for things. So you just need to understand the full context of what you're doing. This is powerful stuff. And if you give it that kind of respect, you'll probably be fine. So yeah, read this section, check it out. After the introduction, we have the introduction. Here, you know what? I wrote a question in here. I think I want to throw out to the group. On page VII, or page 7 of the introduction, right there in this paragraph will start off, nowadays, even though companies have vulnerability management programs and all these other things, we have seen other reports that say compromises have lasted a really long time. The questions I want companies to ask, this is the last sentence, if these exact same bad guys or actors came after your company with the exact same tactics, would you detect it? How long would it take? Would you recover from it? And could you, and this is the part I highlighted, could you figure out exactly what they did? I wanted to take a step back, not just think red team, but think forensics and blue team and incident response. How important is that? If your strategy was, yeah, someone did something bad, but I have backups and I'm just going to restore from the backup and move forward, I'm not really going to care why or how or whatever they did, just so long as things are back to normal. I happen to agree with the author, but I thought I'd throw that out to the group. How important is it to know and figure out exactly what they did? Anybody have any thoughts? Okay, very.
Very
Why?
important.
Why can't I just restore? Why can't I just restore from backup and move forward? Blow it away.
How many times are you going to restore from backup? That's the question.
Well, if you're back to normal, you're back to where you were before they got in, and they can get you right back in.
I think for this group it's obvious. Now tell the IT team that spent all that time and effort to build the backup snapshot recovery system that it's also important for us to spend this time to do red teaming activities to understand the techniques and investigate why. How is that easy? Is it really that easy? Or
yeah, how much overtime do you guys want to spend sitting on that help desk? It's that simple, because if you have everything, if you learn from it, they're going to have to spend less and less time anytime something happens, because we're going to have better and better things. It's going to be noticed earlier, and there's going to be less to clean up.
Yep. Well, so in my ideal part of my brain, I definitely agree. But then just to maybe play devil's advocate a little bit, one thing, there's a ton of infrastructure that's needed to be able to put all the pieces together. And I think there is, to go back to something that I'm not sure who was speaking earlier, but when they were commenting on, it depends on the nature of the business. You may only have to go so deep, right? You may not need to connect all the way through and see every little detail of what was done, as long as you can get far enough that you can improve and prevent that same thing from happening again or similar things from happening again. You may not need like the endpoint forensic level information on a workstation, depending on the nature of what that workstation does and what kind of data it has access to, right? If it has really sensitive health records, yeah, you need like from, point A being the firewall all the way down to the very end where that workstation may have been compromised. You need to know all that. But if you're like, a retail business and you don't, handle credit card data because you paid somebody else to implement that solution, and you've kind of compartmentalized things, your main concern may actually stop at the perimeter, right? How did they get in? Okay, that's how they did it. Let's patch that hole and then stop there. We don't need to go any further. And I'm not necessarily saying I agree with that, but I think a a business argument can definitely be made for that.
But you see, even what you
I
just
love
said,
it. I love
right?
it.
Even what you just said right there goes ahead and gives you a what they did. And it isn't just, oh, we're just going to restore and leave everything as it was. You're still diagnosing what they did. And that was the question, is how important is it to know what they did? Not how far did they go doing it, not what the minute details were in it, but what did they do to get in? Whether that be breaking through a firewall, whether that be, okay, how did they exfiltrate it if you want to go that far? But at some point, there's always going to be that, what they did. Otherwise, you leave everything in a static and you're right back to square one. You don't get anything off of it. So you're not even patching that firewall hole.
Yeah, I think we just need to know enough to just go ahead and know it to the point where, you know, we found the problem and you're able to fix it. I mean, certainly you can go a lot deeper, but at least get it to the point where you're not restoring all the time, but then just, you know, be able to close that hole, you know, that they broke into.
You can apply a lot of structure to this concept, but the reality is you're dealing with a chain of risks, and one of those risks enabled them entry. One of those risks enabled them lateral movement. You know, I mean, a whole chain of events, right? So some of those things may be a lot more potentially risky and damaging to you than some of the other things. And how deep you decide to analyze down that chain of events is totally a business context type of situation. Because you could take it all the way down to how they got information exfiltrated, right? If they exfiltrated information, are you going to try to, you know, diagnose that situation? Whereas just patching the hole in the firewall that let them in the first place now removes 90% of the risks that you may experience, other than that one occasional masterful attacker that uses a social engineering exploit or whatever. You can.
It was. I think it was Musashi. Correct me if I'm wrong there. Who you didn't use the word kill chain, but I think that's kind of what you were talking about, right? And applying sort of the science piece to understanding the red team activity versus the blue team's efforts. And I think sort of the glue in that is understanding the kill chain, right? Between pen testing and data going out the door. There's a couple of things that go on in between. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I think, who was it that had some of the command and control domain stuff set up? If you want, I can give you control. Okay, and me is?
Vext, 0x Vext.
Okay, can you just share? If I stop sharing, can you just start sharing? Would that do the trick, I think?
Let's find
and we're getting it.
I've never used this program before, so let's see.
So on your screen at the bottom, you'll see it looks more like an upload instead of a download arrow. And then it'll give you the choice of, there you go. Hey.
Does that work? Cool.
There you go. Okay, so in the end of chapter, or as you get near the end of chapter 1, I think they talk about something that's going to come back again. And I think it's important to read and to actually do this. I don't know how you're going to do without buying a domain, but we got a couple things in chat for doing it. And if you would just show us a little bit of your setup that will, and I think, enable a lot of this command and control stuff in the future, which I think is a key part of the new version. And I think a great way to like sort of end our discussion here would be to check this out, and then we'll start wrapping things up. So yeah, go ahead. What are we looking at here?
Sure. Yeah. So to your point, having domains to play with, super important. If you rotate which registrars you use, they're always running sales, so you can usually pick something up for a couple bucks. For the way they get you, right, the first year is a couple bucks, and then it's like $20 to renew if you want to keep it. But for labbing and testing, you don't need to keep it, so you can just let it expire after the first year is up. So this time around, Namecheap was cheaper. I've used a couple others. I threw them in the chat, but just Google like best deals on registrars, and you can find that. But to set this up, he gives instructions for GoDaddy. So they've got one method. I think his instructions might be out of date in the book. I think they did a redesign not long ago. Don't quote me on that because I haven't used GoDaddy since like 6 months ago. But the steps are generally the same, but you need to obviously register the domain. So you have access to that. You need to have some public IP address that you can host something on. As everybody was talking about, definitely recommend doing something in the cloud, AWS, Azure, whatever. In this case, I'm using Linode, which is just an older Linux VPS provider. They have like a $5 a month option for your VPS. So spin something up, you'll get a public IP address for that. So those are kind of the two pieces you need, right? Something with a public IP address and register the domain. When you go in there with your registrar, you have to set that VPS as your name server of record, and they all have slightly different ways of doing it, and it's not always super intuitive. And my hunch is they actually don't want you to do it this way, and that's kind of why they make it a little bit kludgy to find it. So for Namecheap specifically, when you go in, you've registered your domain, you go in and manage it under your domain list. You have to go to their advanced DNS section. And in there, and they've got help docs on this, which is how I was able to figure out their process, which was different from Pork Buns, which is different from GoDaddy's. You go into the advanced DNS, you go to add a name server, and this interface is super unintuitive. You drop down, you select the host name that you want to give the name server, so they default to like NS1, NS2, whatever, and then you give it the IP address of the public server that's going to be your C2 server. So in this case, I would give it my VPS IP address, which I've already done here, so I'm not going to add it. But you would add that IP address here, hit done, and then that enables you on the main domain page to then. Basically, what you've done with this page, you've created an object that you can point to. You then go to the main domain section here, and you point to that object that you've created as your authoritative domain server. So I've already done that. It's right here. So you go, by default, when you register one with them, it would say basic DNS. Once you've created that object, you go here and you say custom DNS, and you point it to the name that the object you've added. In this case, I did it twice, but they're both actually the same IP. So that's enough from the infrastructure side to have an authoritative domain server. So any query for this domain is going to look for a name server, look for these two specific name servers. Once it hits, it's going to go up the chain in DNS, it's going to get to the top level, and Namecheap is the registrar for this domain, and they're going to say, oh, that name server is this one, which would resolve to the VPS that I've already set up. So that's kind of the background of setting it up. A couple of notes, because it's been a while since I did this and I was troubleshooting. If you're hosting a proper DNS server, a really good tool to use is What's My DNS, where you can go in and you can say, oh, I want to check, is my DNS domain resolving from various places in the world? So like, is Google resolving? Of course it is, right? And it'll check from different high-level DNS hosting providers throughout the world. When you're setting up C2, this is not going to resolve properly. So these, you're going to get red X's. So like if I do DNS, what was my domain? .info. And you can specify the type of record you're looking for, but name server is what we're concerned about for C2. If I search on this, it's going to get really weird, inconsistent results. So like Italy knows about that server that I set up, but the US is like, that's not valid. I don't know what that is. You actually don't have to worry about that because you're not hosting proper DNS. So these ones are just doing different checks. Like the server in Virginia is doing more thorough checks than the one in Italy. So it's actually trying to send some kind of message to my server and say, hey, are you a DNS server, yes or no? This one is just like, is there a record that points to it? That's good enough for me. So you get some inconsistencies there. I spent a lot of time kind of banging my head on this and then realized that's not a problem. That's because I'm not setting up a proper DNS server. I'm setting up a C2 server that's going to do some weird stuff. So with that in place, with a VPS that's already, I've already set up my VM and I've walked through some of the settings in the book. What I'm going to show here real quickly is kind of I'm going to show the one that does work and the one that doesn't work because of the binary issue that I'm running into. This tab here is going to be my server. So this is in the cloud. I've already downloaded DNSCat. I've set it up. I've tested it. And so I've got my command kind of queued up here to run DNSCat using the same syntax that he showed in the book. And I'm specifying my domain. I'm using a subdomain on it because I had an issue when I didn't use the subdomain. So if I run that, it sets it up and it's listening. Nice thing about DNSCat is it gives you the command to run. And one of the things it does by default is it generates a key. So someone else can't randomly connect to your DNSCat listener unless they have that key, which is at least a small amount of security, which is nice. I've already got the command queued up, but I need to specify the key, and it rotates those keys every time you run it. So pay attention to that. So what I'm doing right now for this test, this is the one where I'm actually going to just specify the server to go straight to. I'm not going to go through proper DNS hierarchy because, as I mentioned earlier, it crashes on me, and I'll demonstrate that as well. But if I go straight to the server on port 53 with the proper secret, and I hit enter, and then I jump back to my server. So yeah, it says session established. If I jump back to my server, it'll say it got a new session and it's encrypted and verified. So this on the C2 side, this is now an interactive, it's an interactive program, and it gives you the option to drop into that session that you created. So you can do Windows and it'll show you which ones are active. So I've got one active right now, and it's using this domain, and this number here is what indicates what it is. So if I had multiple endpoints that had sessions running on them, I'd have a 1, I'd have a 2, I'd have a 3, etc. And it borrows a little bit from Meterpreter and similar things like that if you've ever done session management on those. The syntax is different, but it's the same idea where you're going to say, I want to interact with, I call it a window. I'm going to interact with window 1, which is similar to the session management in Meterpreter or Cobalt Strike. So if you hit that, it'll drop into that specific window. So now from the server side, the C2 server, which is this one that I'm on here, I can run commands on that victim machine that ran the binary. So I could do, I think shell is the command on this one. Yeah, so it creates a new second, it spawns off another session. So it keeps the master session, and it created one that's for the shell. So you go, I think it's back. And now if I go Windows, I'll have 2 of them. All right, so here's the master one on that machine, and then here's the one that's actually running SH on that. So if I interact with that, and then I do like, name, I have to do, let's see. I do ls. It's got a certain subset of commands that you can run, and then there's a way to drop into like a full
Oh, actually, you
shell.
typed Windows instead of window.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, you didn't connect.
Yep, good catch. Yeah, I don't like that it has 2 commands that are so close there. There it is. Okay. So now, yeah, and it puts it in the prompt. This is the machine I'm on. So now from the C2 server, which is this tab, I have command ability on this machine, which is my local VM here. So I could do who am I, see the user. And there's a little bit of delay you saw there because it does pass through a DNS request, which is a little bit small, or a little, the packets are small, so it takes a few requests. I can do an ls and see what's in that folder. Can I do an L? Yeah, so I can actually format it. You can see, what's on that actual machine. So that's the kind of long and short of running it. Now I'm going to demonstrate the problem that I was encountering as well. If I kill this session.
So just want to ask you a quick question there. You say you defined that VPN subdomain. Where are you defining the zone for that? Like where
so since the name record points to my server as the name server of record, and DNSCat is smart enough to just interpret if there's a subdomain, it'll just use that. So the software knows how to handle that automatically. With a real name server, you would have to specify at minimum like a wildcard record in the DNS zone, but DNSCat basically just emulates that, and anytime it sees a subdomain, it can parse that.
Okay. Okay. Because I just tried it and it didn't work on my end, but it could be something else.
Yeah, so as long as the only thing that matters is they have to match between when you run the server with this command.
Oh, I see.
Highlight things. So if I specify vpn.loldns on the server side, when I run the command, I have to specify. So in this one I went directly to it, but if I was going through proper DNS, I would have to specify that same subdomain.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense.
But that is what crashes on me, so I'm going to demonstrate that as well. So I'm going to start the server again, and this time and I didn't highlight this when I went through it the first time, but it shows both types of commands. If you want to do it, this is the clean way, this is the stealthy way if everything's working, where it does not go directly to the server, and that's kind of the whole point of using DNS C2. This is the secondary command. This is what I demoed just a moment ago, where I go straight to that server. So I'm saying, here's the DNS server I want you to talk to. And that's louder because from a logging perspective, there's going to be a record that you communicated straight to that. When I run this one, I'll go ahead and try it, but it keeps erroring out on me, and I have to figure out why and what the problem is. Yeah, see it immediately on the server side. It says it hit, right? It says, okay, that's valid. I can talk to that, and it immediately gives me a Ruby error. And it says, I wasn't expecting any parameters. I was given one, and it just throws up and it dies. So the server actually stopped running as a result of that. And that's consistent, and I haven't figured out what is causing it. I need to look at actual packet captures and see if I can figure out what's being passed to it when I do it that way.
It tells you right there, man. Wrong number of arguments.
Yeah. But what's the argument? Where did it come from? Because I didn't do it.
This is what the client. Okay. So what I'll do there is we'll start wrapping it up. So read chapter 1, and maybe after this discussion or whatever, I think this is what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to do two things. I'm going to make this domain DNS cat thing work, right? So I read it, I learned it, I've seen some examples, I'm going to do it. I'm also going to read chapter 2. And then me personally, I'm going to work in Azure for automated system deployment as I read chapter 2. But I think this is really useful, and I don't think you can spend enough time going back into chapter 1 and experimenting with a different tool deployment. Someone earlier was talking about taking an image and using that image to deploy to AWS. Do it. Let us know how it goes. Also, too, if you read through chapter 1, I put little ticks next to each of the times he points to an external article. It happens a lot. So I don't think you could read enough. Like if you read the MITRE attack matrix, I put some ticks by that. The Cobalt Strike stuff, Terraform. I think I need to learn what that is and how that works. Anybody use Terraform scripts for scripting? I got that impression. Anybody try that piece or go dig into that a little bit? Red Baron, anything like that? Anybody do that? Maybe not. Okay, I'm gonna go check it out. All right, so just to wrap it up. Okay, so next time we will talk chapter 2, 2 weeks from now. Use Slack, keep talking to each other about what problems we're coming up with. If you resolve that thing where DNS cat was crashing and then after you make the change it doesn't crash anymore, let us know. Just sort of one of the things I wanted to do at the end here was sort of just open it up for a more general conversation with maybe some of the people that haven't really said much, or if there was something you wanted to talk about and we never got to the topic, just maybe we'll put on the list for next time, or people can hang around afterwards and talk. Just tell me a little bit about, what made you think you wanted to read this book, what brought you here tonight, what you're hoping to get out of it. I just wanted to sort of get a little bit away from the actual text and just hear a little bit about what you were thinking, what you're trying to learn, and and just sort of give people a chance to talk about stuff. So what's on your mind? Jump in, speak up.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw something out there. When I was setting up my instance on AWS, I was using 802, Ubuntu 802.4 with PTF. and I was getting an error when I was installing the intelligence gathering module. After doing some research, I couldn't find anything. So I just went through and did the Ubuntu 16.04, and I didn't have any errors. So just something to pass along there as well.
Yeah, I had some errors, and it wasn't just with intelligence gathering. There was another one, I can't remember which one it was, but it just crashed while I was installing. I tried it.
It's because of NetPlan. Like the new Ubuntu doesn't point to the same files, the configurations that house the DNS or Samba, like all those files now point towards systemd oriented controls instead of what Ubuntu 16.04 does. So when you install these tools, they're looking in those config files and they're finding information that's not in line with the information that the system itself is portraying. And it's a nightmare trying to go through and like force it to align all of those config files to the NetPlan. It isn't even honestly worth fighting with unless you have a money-oriented case around making it work. I spent like an entire Saturday, 14 hours trying to get the new Ubuntu, and it was honestly, I mean, it was a little bit complicated what I was trying to do, but I wouldn't waste the time unless you absolutely have to.
No, I absolutely agree. Just something to pass along to everybody else to try to make it a little less painful.
I guess I'll go. I read the first version of the book, and I've been doing these I've been doing project management stuff for a long time, and it's just not as fun as back when I was a sysadmin, kind of doing the hands-on stuff. And honestly, kind of want to, I have to finish some project management certifications, but at the same time, I'm really trying to get some Red Hat certified sysadmin and doing all that kind of stuff. And the end goal is playing around with pen testing. And, I've been doing this stuff forever. So I just think it's super fun and interesting. I'm hoping to come out of reading this book a wizard.
I have.
Yeah, for me, I am kind of on a mission to, if not master, then get familiar with each and every technique in the MITRE metrics. So I believe by the end of this book, I will be familiar with a few more techniques and help me on my way.
I've never really done much as far as the pen testing or red teaming side. I've been so hard on the blue team side that I'm trying to start learning the other side of everything. So for me, this is an introduction to some of the tools. How do they work, and a chance to work with other people such as all of you on how and the why behind it. So that way I can turn around and say, all right, so this is how I can defend against it a little bit better.
I'll go. I'm in my first role where my official title is pen tester, and I'm 2-ish months into that, and so the timing couldn't have been better for us picking up this book. Just definitely looking for it to sort of supplement what I'm learning on the job and in my free time.
I mean, for me, other than just liking to read new things, what does it say in the chat there? Right, yeah. Knowing red is to be a better blue. I really like the way he said that. Doing it systematically, I think that's incredible. To take the MITRE attack framework and just have a systematic approach to getting better at defending, I think is a great strategy. I don't know what your plans are, what you're thinking, but you should definitely be writing down how that's going and what you're learning. I mean, if you use that attack framework to understand how attack works and each of the techniques to understand how to be a better blue team, there is some definite blogging and speaking opportunities in that. Like, you should keep a journal at least of what you're doing. For me, I just want to stay sharp. I mean, this is what I started in, and the techniques have sort of passed me by. So this is my attempt to get caught back up. I like reading InfoSec books. If you couldn't tell, it really doesn't matter what the topics are. So I just want to absorb each of these things, and as I learn this, it'll make me better at my DevOps stuff, right? Whether it's knowing how to deploy an application and build security into that process. Like I'm going to soak up each thing I can learn. So that's my goal. Not to mention getting to know new people, hearing their perspectives on things. We'll just take this book and turn it into something like way more interesting and way more valuable for me. So like that's why I'm not just reading the book, that's also why I'm here. So anybody else want to sort of chime in before we wrap it up? There's no rush. But yeah, anybody, what else is on your mind? Anybody else got something to say?
Well, I learn a lot more when I try to explain something to people and I explain it incorrectly and they help me to understand where I'm wrong. So I'm hoping for more of that.
Yeah. I mean, the experience level for a group like this, there's like no prerequisite, right? Like it's HexVet is saying, like if you're inexperienced, you'll learn by speak up, right, and share your failures or errors or obstacles or whatever. You'll learn by doing that, and then people with more experience can still learn more by trying to explain something, right? You don't really know how well you know something until you try to teach it to somebody. So this is not necessarily class, right? We read before we show up, which is a big difference between this and a class. But I mean, we all have something to gain from by talking with each other. So there's no reason for anybody to hold back, and hopefully people don't feel like they have to hold back because maybe they don't have the experience. So even if you didn't read, talking about related experiences would still be valuable for everybody. So yeah. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up the time. We're over. I mean, these topics are awesome. We're going to go over sometimes. We try to keep it to an hour. I also notice some people have left, and maybe they'll catch the end of the video. But next time, 2 weeks from now, we'll discuss Chapter 2. If you're, I guess most of us are in the U.S., right? That's Thanksgiving week. The day before Thanksgiving would be Wednesday, the 21st. That's not going to stop me from getting online and chatting about the book. I would completely understand if other people have different stuff going on, but we don't just talk about it here, right? We got Slack, and this Zoom and this forum is actually available more often if someone wants to just get together and talk about domain names. Hey, walk me through that, or here, I've done this, and I'm expecting this to happen, but it's not. Can I show you? You can get on Zoom and do that. So we don't have to wait for 2 weeks to talk about this again. But 2 weeks from now, we'll read Chapter 2, talk about Mr. Kim and his tone here. So anything else before I close it up?
Oh,
No,
you're going to share the. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, man.
I was just going to say you're going to share the link for the this recording on YouTube on Slack tomorrow or sometime this week.
Yeah, I mean it's the link to the playlist for the book club. I think we count on Brian to add that. So it could take a day. It could be up. Like he's West Coast, right? So I'll mention it after this is over, and maybe he'll do it in 5 minutes, but it might take like 48 hours. But
cool.
It'll get up there.
Private playlist.
Yeah. I mean, we ask that no one share the link. I mean, there's no extreme extremely strong mechanism to validate the authorization of people viewing it. Other than we just try to keep that private. So,
sure.
I mean, it's just in the past, the decision was made that as we recorded these things, we want to encourage people to discuss what's on their mind and their own experiences. And I think keeping a private video makes it much more likely people are to open up. So
yep.
I mean, that's the way that works. Yeah, it'll take about 2 days, I think. But you'll see it on Slack. Yeah.
I just want to say thanks for taking the time to host this, man. I know it's an investment, and thanks a lot, CJ, for sharing your screen and going through the DNS stuff. Can be a real pain for people that don't know it or haven't done it before, and that's a question that a lot of people are embarrassed to ask because DNS seems really easy, but it's definitely not. But also, congrats on the new job, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that wasn't me who shared my screen, though. That was OX Vexed.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Vexed.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here and participating.
Yeah.
This was great.
And sorry to jumping at the end. Like I said, I'm blue and I'm reading this thread to get better at purple. So just a short excerpt from page 11 in the first paragraph. The author talks about Cobalt Strike. So he says, not all of your infected hosts should talk to internet on your domain. So only one host should talk to a public domain, and then the other host can talk to each other via SMB beacons. So in my attempt to make this book purple from red, I'm also thinking about the detection and the protection pictorial cycle techniques, what I can do to defend against it, to detect it. So in that case, the east to west NSM, network security monitoring things come in handy that Richard Belchick and other people keep telling us. So you don't need to capture just from the edge. If you are capturing traffic from east to west, what your hosts talking to each other, you can detect these things. And by placing things like private VLAN, you can block, and everyone is doing these days. So if you have private VLAN in a network in place, your Cobalt Strike SM beaconing will not work between the hosts. And in that very paragraph at the end, he says like, so this way, if one of the system's secondary system is detected and forensic analysis is performed, they might not be able to identify the C2 domain associated. So what he's trying to say is your primary machine is talking to your C2 host on internet, and your secondary machines are talking to your primary machine via SMB beacons. So if your secondary machine is busted during the forensic analysis, it's not gonna reach to the primary machine, which is not totally accurate. It depends on the forensics analysis. So in the triage forensic analysis, what you do is you develop your IOCs, indicator of compromise. So based on the Cobalt Strike modules that are present on those secondary machines, anyone would do a sweep of other machines. So if there is a registry entry, if there is a file on the file system, if there is a process in memory, any indicator of compromise that is common between those secondary and primary server, those primary servers are going to also pop up during the IOC sweep scan across the network. So this is how I'm reading this book, by placing the blue countermeasures against every red thing, how I can detect it, how I can prevent it, and blah, blah.
What just happened? You just volunteered to give the purple team perspective on every chapter from here to the end of the book. So we appreciate that. So I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That is an incredibly but that is an incredibly important perspective for a book like this. Just like it would be from reading a blue team book to get someone else's perspective on the bypass, the sneak around, the yeah, but that works, except, like, that is definitely going to help us get more out of this book than if we were just to read it. So we really appreciate that. Keep doing that, and I'm really glad you added that. Thank you very much. Way to go. All right, I'm gonna drop the recording. I'm going to throw the links into Slack, and I will talk to everybody in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
Have a good night, everyone.
Take it easy, everyone.
Thanks.